Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad, Kuttan.
You're watching Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Awang Rasau was an injured male Malayan tiger who had recently been caught in Terengganu. He had been shot by poachers, 8 bullets in his left hind legs, which left him paralyzed. Now, because of this, he was unable to hunt natural prey and had to kill livestock to survive. The Wildlife and National Parks Department, or better known as Buletin, had rescued him and provided care, but unfortunately, Awang Rasau died from his injuries on March 5th. Now, this is another loss of our wild tigers. What needs to be done to ensure the few numbers that are left are protected? Joining us on the show tonight, we have Kanitha Krishnasamy. She's the Director for Traffic in Southeast Asia. Traffic is an NGO that monitors global trade of wild animal and plants. Kanitha, nice to have you back on the show. It's good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us tonight. Now, I want to ask you about Awang Rasau's story, this tiger that was shot by poachers, injured, then dying of his injuries. Now, is this story a typical one that we see with Malaysian wildlife? I mean, what can we learn from Awang Rasau's death?
I think the foremost typical lesson from this is the fact that Malayan tigers continue to be targeted for trade, meaning they consistently are being poached from our forests. Over the last decade and a half, we've seen so many tigers fallen prey to this threat. And Malayan tigers are unique in the sense that they are a subspecies, unique to just Malaysia. And because of the threat from poaching and trade, they have been classified globally as critically endangered. Now, what that means is that they're just one step closer to becoming extinct in the wild.
Kanitha, can you help us understand the profile of the poachers? Who are they? What are the local or foreign connections? What market do these produce from the animal go to?
Right. So the fact that Malaysia is a biodiverse, rich country, that makes us a very important source country. And so the people who are involved in this poaching and trade are very much Malaysians. But they're not just Malaysians. In fact, in the last few years, authorities have been making arrests involving Malaysians for sure, but also increasingly foreigners that have basically entered into our forests. And a lot, they comprise a combination of individuals who are either here legally, meaning they are here with valid visas and permits, or individuals that are not meant to be in the country, meaning they are illegal immigrants, or people who've been in Malaysia and working in and around the forest for legal employment purposes, but they are involved in illegal activity. Now, Malaysia is a very important source for tigers, and we believe that a vast majority of our tigers are actually feeding more an international demand elsewhere in Asia, as opposed to feeding a demand that is considered significant in Malaysia.
Right. So, and because of that, Kanitha, can I ask you, with the pandemic and the subsequent lockdowns, and of course, border closures, but also the ensuing recession, right? So people are struggling now a lot more than they were, say, a year or two ago. Can I ask you how that's impacted what you've seen of wildlife trade or wildlife trafficking? Has it made it worse, or has it, because of the border lockdown, has it put a pause on things?
I think the one thing we can say for sure is that poaching and trade has continued. COVID or no COVID, lockdown or no lockdown. The one, I suppose, clearer indication is perhaps the lesser volume of wildlife parts and commodities that are coming in and out of the country. So, for example, if we're looking at the issue of global wildlife trade, illegal wildlife trade, a significant volume is shipped through container, through the sea, through seaports. But equally, a huge number of incidents involve people traveling by air, so hand carried. People carry tortoises, ivory, live tiger in one case in Thailand. So, all of these incidents that involve cross-border trade to some extent has reduced. And that's purely from the perspective of assessing seizures. So if we're looking at the large-scale pangolin seizures and ivory seizures that have occurred throughout Southeast Asia and in fact around the world, prior to 2020, the volumes were much higher, the frequencies were much higher. 2020, we saw things sort of slowing down a little bit. But once you look at incidences within national jurisdictions, a slightly different picture emerges in the sense that it really reinforces the point that domestic level poaching and trade hasn't really reduced. We're certainly not in a position to say that they have reduced. So if we look at countries like Malaysia, like Indonesia, like Philippines, like Thailand, and if you look at the track record of the seizures that government agencies have made, they're pretty stunning. Hundreds and hundreds of birds and tiger parts in Malaysia. At the end of December, on the 30th of December, police arrested a man in Kelantan for illegal possession of a tiger and a leopard. That leopard both the tigers and the leopard were suspected to have been first snared and then shot. So what this tells us is that, perhaps there was some level of disruption to people's activities during COVID because of, restriction of movement. But at the same time, when you're restricted to your area, so for example, if you're living in and around a rural area or close to forests, nobody really knows what's going on. You know how frequently you go in and out. Because of the restrictions, it's a bit harder to detect these sort of activities.
Kanitha, if we can come back to that ecosystem question that I had earlier, you didn't actually name any countries. And apart from, naming and shaming, I'm really interested in the question of whether those countries become a recipient of these products precisely because they have very weak enforcement or legal, or regulation. So if you could actually tell us a little bit about where these parts go to, whether domestically or internationally.
Sure. So we know from the seizures made by Malaysian authorities, at least, that they're crossing the Thai border, for example. And so what we know in terms of the trade route is they're entering the Thai market. How much of that remains in Thailand is unknown. But markets in China and Vietnam, for example, have a huge demand in the sense that a lot of these wildlife-based products are going into countries with such high demand. And so East Asia and perhaps the Mekong countries within Southeast Asia, the key countries in terms of consumer demand and where tiger parts and a variety of other animal parts are heading towards.
Right. So that's the demand part. And then you talked a bit about the supply part and how a domestic level poaching and trade hasn't actually reduced even in the COVID era. And I'm wondering about levels of enforcement, because I've been reading in the news about Operasi Bersepadu Khazanah, which has been an award-winning effort between the Royal Malaysian Police and Perhilitan. So, we've got this initiative to stop or to stem poaching through this operation. Is it enough, though? I mean, is there such sufficient funding backing this? Is there sufficient legislation to enable law enforcement or the enforcement of wildlife trafficking to do their job well?
So first off, about Operasi Bersepadu Khazanah, absolutely brilliant. They've really been able to sort of take things further beyond what Malaysia was able to do as a country as a whole from a law enforcement perspective. The involvement of police really sort of pushed us further in terms of pursuing the investigations. A lot of the cases that have been successful cases in Malaysia have been because of police involvement and collaboration with police, together with agencies like Perhilitan and others. So from that perspective, absolutely brilliant. They definitely deserve the award that they had received. But at the same time, we're talking about an animal that is so critically endangered. We're talking about less than 200 individual animals. You've got the poaching threat. You've also got the issue of, the age-old land use conversion and, conflict issues that we have, which, to some extent, obviously is reducing tiger habitats, and that causes a whole series of other issues, such was the case in Awang Rasau, for example, where there was a conflict with humans and plantations, and eventually the tiger got poached. So in terms of the question of whether or not we're doing enough, I think everybody working on this issue, including the government agencies themselves, will say that it certainly isn't enough, because we're nowhere near towards solving this problem. A lot of the individuals that have been arrested for illegal possession. We don't know enough about how the networks function. We don't know the individuals who are on the ground planning these sort of poaching and trafficking rings. We don't know who a lot of the end users are. You know, whether these individuals based in Malaysia, what sort of links do they have with traders and traffickers and middlemen outside of this country? How far do their tentacles reach? And so from that perspective, the investigations really need to be enhanced and improved and stepped up. And we see that, you know, there's a greater hope now because police is involved. And we hope that this will also encourage greater collaboration with other agencies, but also in terms of cross-collaboration with countries outside of Malaysia where they are linked along the trade route.
Right.
Kanitha, can we just very quickly, address the issue of the demand? And I suspect, because a lot of this is going into aphrodisiacs and a lot of traditional medicines, perhaps. How much can we change cultural norms and attitudes towards this wildlife? I know it's happened with shark fin soup, for instance, and it really has disappeared in many restaurants. Is it possible to do this with the tiger issue?
I think anything is possible. The question really is how much time it's going to take. So with the issue of traditional medicine, and there's been a lot of demand reduction work that even traffic is leading on in countries like China and in Vietnam. But changing people's behavior is really not that easy, right? I mean, everybody knows you shouldn't drink and drive. You know what the repercussions will be. There are strict laws, but it doesn't stop people from doing it. And when it comes to a cultural belief, it's a little bit harder. I think we are making a difference to some extent, in the sense that there's so much more awareness today. People are more open to talking about it. I mean, if you go on social media, even when Awang Rasa was killed, for example, there were a lot of angry people out there, furious about what happened with this one particular tiger, and it's starting a conversation. And I think that it's a good step, because people are a little bit more aware. And we also hope that this will trigger subsequent actions. So, a lot of things really depends on political will. The will is there from the agencies like police and Perhilitan. But when we're talking about demand, it's a really complicated and hard one, and perhaps slightly different from Malaysia, because if we're talking about tiger trade and demand for tiger products, it's not really a huge problem here within Malaysia. So Malayan tigers are not being poached and trafficked to feed local demand. So for us, for Malaysia, the priority really is in finding out who these people are, who their networks are. And so it's very much about a law enforcement and investigations, priority that needs to be pursued from the Malaysian side.
Right. Kanitha, thank you so much for speaking with us tonight and for shedding light into this very important matter. You're absolutely right. Awang Rasa's story did touch a lot of people. We're happy to talk about it tonight to bring a little bit more awareness to the work that you at Traffic are doing. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Melisa. Thanks, Sharaad.
We're going to take a quick break here on Consider This, but more on this issue in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. With me is Sharaad Kuttan. Let's continue our conversation about what else can be done to protect our tigers following the death of Awang Rasa, one of the less than 200 Malayan tigers that we have left in the wild. Now, just a quick correction to my introduction a bit earlier. Awang Rasa had been shot 8 times, so he had 5 bullets in his body and 3 in his hind legs. Now, he later died due to these injuries. So after years of conservation work and anti-poaching operations, what else will it take to save Malaysia's iconic big cats? Sophia Lim is the Executive Director and CEO of WWF-Malaysia. She joins us on the line now. Sophia, welcome to the show. It's good to have you here. Now, just reflecting on Awang Rasal's story, I'm just wondering what we can learn from this tragedy. When it comes to tiger conservation work, what does that entail? Where are the gaps that perhaps need to be addressed?
Well, I think, yes, sadly, our heart also goes to Awang Rasal, whom we know, of course, did not survive the 8 shots. If you look at the tiger conservation work, there are many aspects. You touch on poaching. The other aspect actually is also about protecting the habitat of the tigers. I think that's the area to also focus. And for this, you know, a lot of the tiger habitats are fragmented, and our work focuses on reconnecting the isolated blocks of forest. That's one area that we need to focus on. We also recommend that we conduct wildlife assessment to identify the best locations for wildlife corridors and lobby for their protection. The other piece of important work that we also want to pursue is to continue with our scientific research to monitor the population of tigers. From this, we collect scientific evidence to determine if our efforts to actually lead towards recovering tigers.
Right.
Other than that, if I may add, now under the Wildlife Conservation Act 2010, tigers are a totally protected species. Offences related to tigers are punishable with fines of up to 500,000 and a mandatory jail sentence not exceeding 5 years. What we ask is for the upcoming revision to the Wildlife Conservation Act for stricter punishments to be enforced. I would also like to share that our government has started a couple of major initiatives, some of them, as mentioned, the Operasi Bersepadu Khazanah. And for this, of course, we congratulate Berita for this very strong recognition at the 5th Asia Environment Enforcement Awards. We are encouraged by the progress made by OBK, but we strongly recommend for this initiative to continue in the longer term. We cannot do this on an ad hoc basis.
Right.
Sophia, if I could come to the question of creating corridors and contiguous areas of forests that are important to the habitat of the tiger and other wildlife. Is one of the challenges the fact that we have a federal system, at least in the peninsula, where state governments have control over land? Is it a question of coordinating, not just simply having a federal level policy, but coordinating state level policies to make or realize such corridors?
As we all know, our tiger habitats are grounds for economic development of the various states, yeah? And we all know that forest products such as timber are extracted, roads are constructed across forests, across the various states, plantations are established where the roads have created access, and settlements are set up to cater to the needs of the workers and plantations. What we recommend is to balance economic growth with maintaining our tiger habitats as a priority. We actually recommend to coordinate interministerial and interagency collaboration. And to do this, we need the highest policy setting body to provide the platform to recover our tiger numbers. I would like to share with you our success stories in Nepal and India. Such committees are chaired by the Prime Minister, where the primary reasons for, and these are some of the primary reasons for the successful recovery of tigers. For that reason, we call upon our Prime Minister to establish a National Tiger Conservation Task Force to lay out conditions and provide the resources needed to mobilize all the resources across the states and federal to prevent the extinction of our tigers.
Okay. Sophia, can I ask you, I mean, we've got less than 200 wild Malayan tigers left. What's the danger if no action is taken now? I mean, no drastic action is taken to stop those numbers from dwindling. Are we looking at the potential of extinction? Could Malayan tigers become extinct in Malaysia, our national icon big cat?
Definitely the answer is yes. And hence that has been our concern where the Malayan tigers, the situation with the Malayan tigers. The decline has been rapid through the years. In the 50s, we had 3,000 tigers. It's now dropped to no more than 200. And if we stay BAU, we will face the extinction of our national treasure, our Malayan tigers. And for this, we call for drastic action. And the time is now. We have to immediately halt the decline. If not, it will be a point of return sooner than we think. Right. And on this, we actually have been calling and we continue to call for all Malaysians from all walks of life to rally behind this cause, to come together as a nation, to do what we can to prevent the extinction of our national jata, the Malayan tiger.
Sophia, could you help us understand the outreach work that you do to the public? What kind of response are you getting in terms of either financial support or a willingness to have this conversation, this very important conversation?
Yeah, awareness. Yeah.
Yes. In fact, at the beginning of the pandemic, we were very concerned that our sources of donation would decline, right? But I'm proud to say that we rallied our team together. We heightened our communication through social media as well as through the traditional media. We continue to share that our work to protect our tigers have not stopped. And as a result of that, I'm very happy to say that we were delighted with the donations that continue to come into WWF-Malaysia from not just the man in the street, but also corporate donors. And for that, we say a big thank you. And these sources of funds allows us to continue our conservation work on the ground.
Okay. Well, Sophia, thank you so much for joining us on the show, and thank you for the good work that is being done by WWF Malaysia. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. And I just would like to say thank you for having me here today. And more importantly, we must protect the Malayan tigers at all costs. Thank you.
All right, that's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. Don't forget to get all the latest news and information on COVID-19 vaccines on astroawani.com as well as the Astro AWANI app. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.